After saving a drowning billionaire, she disappeared. What he'll risk to find her now? The night exploded in chaos as the waves crashed violently against the rocky shore. In the heart of the storm, a silhouette struggled and thrashed, a desperate gasp escaping lips that were destined for silence. Jessica, a waitress with a tough exterior and a heart of gold. Didn't he think twice as she plunged into the cold, black abyss, her own heart racing like mad. Every second felt like an eternity. The ocean-esque grip tightened around her as she lunged for him, her fingers brushing against slick skin. The strength of his panic threatened to drag them both under, but she fought against it, pulling him back into the light. Together, they breached the surface, gasping for air, and it was then she noticed something. His eyes piercing blue, electric, ablaze with gratitude and something else, something that twisted her stomach. He was a billionaire, someone she had only heard about in whispers, a man whose life was an illusory dream to her. But why was he out there? What had chased him into the water? As they both reached the shore, Jessica noticed the crowd gathering, murmurs rising around them like a tide. Shock painted their faces as they witnessed the miraculous escape. No one should have survived that plunge, and yet here they were, shivering and soaked, their fates inexplicably intertwined. But before she could process it, he vanished into the night, slipping past the questioning gazes, leaving her with nothing but a sense of foreboding that enveloped her like a fog. Days turned into weeks. The news broke, headlines screaming about the mysterious woman who saved the billionaire. Yet no one could find her. A simple waitress became a riddle, a legend wrapped in an enigma. What happened to Jessica? Did she disappear willingly? And why did no one know her name? Hey! Before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. Months passed, and the memory haunted him. Mark, the billionaire, felt like a man cursed. What was it about her that gnawed at his sanity? Salvation came at a cost. Despite having everything, he found himself lost in the search for a ghost, driven by a raging storm within. Each lead led to a dead end, whispers fading into the wind. Who could disappear so completely? In a world so connected, how could she be both everywhere and nowhere? Then one night, while flipping through an old newspaper, he found a picture, a glance of her in the dim light of the diner where she worked. Maybe this was the key. A flicker of hope ignited, and in that moment, he knew he had to find her. He had to know why she vanished and where she might be gone. Something deeper tied them together. But would he be ready for what lay ahead? Secrets lurked beneath the surface, ready to shatter everything he thought he knew. The search consumed Mark. Days and nights blurred into one long, relentless pursuit for the single piece of her that could unravel the mystery of Jessica's disappearance. Her face haunted him, an unrelenting echo in his mind. The photo from the newspaper felt like a lifeline, a golden thread pulling him closer to her unknown reality. The diner, he would start there. As he drove through the rain-slicked streets, tension coiled in his chest like spring steel. Every stoplight seemed to mock him, every set of headlights illuminating his desperation. Could she still be working there? Or had she slipped away to exact a fresh life far from the looming shadows of wealth and privilege? The diner emerged like a beacon through the pouring rain, its neon sign flickering with a nostalgia that struck him. He parked and stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming a somber welcome. The scent of coffee mingled with grease, and the warmth enveloped him, but it brought him no comfort. He scanned the room, empty booths lining the walls, a few patrons embedded in their routines. But Jessica was nowhere. "Can I help you?" A waitress approached, her eyes bright with curiosity. It took a moment for Mark to gather himself. "I'm looking for Jessica," he said, the name rolling off his tongue like a prayer. "She worked here a while back." The waitress shifted, a tight smile forming. Jessica? She hasn't worked here in months. Just up and left one day. There was talk about a guy, a rich one, but she never said much. A guy? His heart raced at the implication. Was there more to her life than he knew? And why had she ghosted him, ghosted everyone? Do you know where she went? Mark pressed, desperation settling deeper. The waitress shrugged. No one does. A couple of regulars said she mentioned something about wanting a fresh start. You know how it goes. Yeah, his voice trailed off. Fresh start. But at what cost? Mark felt something jolt through him, the thrill of the chase mingled with a raw sense of fear. Was she running from him? Or something else entirely? As he turned to leave, he noticed a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. A figure slipped through the door, and before he even saw her face, his heart slammed against his ribs. It was her, Jessica. Initially, she looked disheveled, her hair damp from the rain, eyes shadowed with something painful, something dark. But a heartbeat later, she seemed to spot him across the room. The moment turned electric. In an instant, apprehension danced on her features before she turned on her heel to escape. Jessica! He shouted, his voice a mix of desperation and determination. But the diner was a coffin of silence as she darted outside into the storm. He barely registered the waitress's confused expression. For a moment, time slowed. Mark bolted after her, the rain hammering down as he slammed through the exit. Her figure danced in the mist, fleeing like a deer. Wait, he called, dread pooling in his gut. Please, just talk to me. She halted briefly, and he thought he saw her hesitate. But then, flash, she was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the night. His world tilted. He could lose her again, and the thought twisted his insides. What would he risk to catch her? To uncover the secrets she was hiding? Every instinct urged him to follow, to chase after the truth that slipped away like grains of sand. And in that moment of torment, Mark realized there was no turning back. As he sprinted through the rain, he felt the edges of something darker lurking at the corners of a mystery he had just begun to unveil. What had Jessica wanted to escape? Who or what was pursuing her? The storm raged on, but he wouldn't stop until he knew the answers. But as he rounded the corner, breathing heavily, an unsettling thought struck him. What if some secrets were meant to stay buried? Mark pushed through the sheets of rain, his heart pounding louder than the thunder overhead. Adrenaline surged through him, yet fear gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Jessica had been so close, just a few fleeting heartbeats away. He wouldn't let her vanish again. Not like that. He rounded another corner, his feet splashing in puddles, and glanced up and down the street. She was nowhere. The storm swallowed all sound, save for the patter of rain against pavement and his own heavy breaths. He turned his face to the downpour, hoping it would clear his vision, sharpen his mind. Jessica! He shouted again, desperation clawing at his voice. Just as he started to lose hope, he caught a glimpse of movement. A shadowy figure scurried across an alley. Was it her? He sprinted toward it. Each step felt like it carried all his unspoken fears. What if he was too late? What if she was already lost to whatever darkness had claimed her? As he dashed into the alley, he realized it was a dead end. The figure slipped behind a dumpster, and Mark paused, heart racing. Jessica? He called softly, the edge of his voice laced with caution. The silhouette halted, hesitating. Who's there? A voice called, shaky and breathless. It wasn't Jessica. A small woman emerged, fear etched on her face, eyes wide and glimmering with unshed tears. Please don't hurt me. Mark's shoulders dropped, confusion battling desperation. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm looking for Jessica. Did you see her? The woman shook her head, eyes darting to the darkness behind her as if something lurked there, watching. She ran past here. She looked scared. Scared of what? Mark pressed, but the woman turned away. You don't understand. You can't, she started, voice trembling. Can't what? His breath quickened, urgency saturating his words. But the woman was already backing away. She didn't want to be found. If you care about her, you should leave. And then, just like that, she disappeared back into the shadows of the alley. Mark clenched his fists, frustration boiling. The storm continued its furious assault, each raindrop seeming to mock his futile search. What had Jessica gotten herself tangled up in? Just as he prepared to head back into the street, a flicker of movement caught his eye once more. This time, it wasn't a person, but a car, its headlights cutting through the rainfall, slowing near the edge of the sidewalk. Mark's gut twisted. He stepped closer, watching the sleek black vehicle as it rolled to a stop. Tension crackled around him. The window lowered slightly, and a voice drifted out, smooth and unmistakable. "Mark, is that you?" He squinted against the rain, heart leaping. It was Brian, Jessica's affluent, enigmatic brother. But why was he here? "What do you want?" Mark breathed, the weight of suspicion settling hard in his chest. "Get in," Brian said coldly. "I need to talk to you about Jessica." Mark hesitated, instincts screaming at him to turn back, to keep chasing after her rather than get embroiled in whatever game Brian was playing. But curiosity gnawed at him. What did Brian know? What secrets shadowed Jessica's life that he might unveil? Without thinking, he opened the door and climbed in, heart racing with a mix of dread and hope. The rain drummed relentlessly against the roof as Brian pulled away from the curb, the tension between them thick enough to choke on. "Listen carefully," Brian said, and Mark braced himself for whatever revelation would follow. "Jessica is in deeper trouble than you could imagine." Mark felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean?" But before Brian could respond, a sudden crash echoed from behind them, followed by the screech of tires and frantic shouting. Something told him this would lead to more questions than answers. But now there was another layer of urgency to the chase. "What trouble, Brian? Tell me," Mark demanded, a chilling sense of dread coiling in his chest. "Before I can explain," Brian said, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror, "we need to get out of here. Fast." Mark felt every muscle yank tight with tension. This wasn't just a search for Jessica anymore. This was becoming a race against something sinister, and they were in its crosshairs. What had he walked into? He needed answers, and he needed them now. The storm roared outside, but inside the car, a storm of a different kind brewed. How much darker would this get? And what would he have to sacrifice to claw the truth from the depths? The car sped through the rain-soaked streets, the world outside a blur of shadows and splashes. Mark's heart raced, not just from the fear of losing Jessica, but from the unsettling tension in Brian's voice. A nagging intuition whispered that he had stepped into a trap, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. Jessica's life hung in the balance, and whatever Brian knew could be critical. "Just drive," Mark urged, his voice taut. "What did you mean when you said she's in trouble?" Brian's jaw tightened, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "If we're caught here, it could be bad for both of us." He flicked his gaze to the rearview mirror again, a flicker of panic flashing across his features. "Caught? By who?" Mark pressed, impatience simmering just under his skin. "Brian, what is going on?" The brother hesitated, his lips pressing together as if weighing his words. Finally, he spoke, though his voice was barely audible above the howl of the wind. "The people after her, they're dangerous. They don't play by the rules." Mark's stomach twisted. "Dangerous how? What did she get tangled in?" Brian shook his head, clearly wrestling with something more than just words. "I can't explain it all right now, but the moment she sealed the deal, she put herself in their sights. I tried to warn her." Mark felt sick. What deal? What was so important that she de-risk everything? There was a pause, tense, electric. "I only know part of it, but there are factions that will do anything to control the assets she got involved with," Brian said, his voice lowering as if he feared the shadows would reach out and snatch him away. "Assets?" Mark echoed incredulously. "You mean money? What are we talking about?" "More than money," Brian replied, shooting another frantic glance behind them. "People's lives are on the line. The storm's not the only reason we need to move." The words struck Mark like a punch to the gut. He could feel the weight of hidden truths pressing down, suffocating him. "Where are we going?" To a place I know is safe. I have connections, Brian said, his voice gaining a note of urgency. But we need to lose them first. Before Mark could ask another question, Brian slammed on the brakes. The tires skidded, and they lurched to a halt, splashing through a large puddle. What? Mark gasped, eyes widening as a black SUV bore down on them from the opposite direction, headlights glaring like an oncoming storm. Get down, Brian shouted, ducking low. Mark followed instinctively, heart pounding in his ears. Bang! Bang! The sound echoed through the car. Bullets ricocheted off the pavement. The frantic shouting pierced the storm. Go, Brian! We have to get out! Mark yelled, panic surging through him. Brian's hands shook as he fumbled for the gear stick. I can't just take off. They'll follow. They're not going to just let us sit here. Mark shot back, every nerve alight with fear for Jessica. The SUV whipped around them, and Mark caught a glimpse of figures masked in darkness, eyes like predators ready to strike. Time slowed as the reality sunk in. This was no mere chase. They were being hunted. With a fierce determination, Mark leaned closer to Brian. Whatever it takes, we need to know where Jessica is. We can't let them win. Brian's gaze flicked to Mark, a mixture of fear and resolve flashing in his eyes. You really want to find her? Then brace yourself, things are about to get much worse. The words hung heavy in the air, a tolling bell of impending horror. Mark nodded, knowing they were at the edge of a precipice, and behind them loomed the darkness they'd just begun to understand. With a roar, Brian spun the wheel and floored the gas. Tires screeched against the wet asphalt, propelling them into the night, leaving the storm and the threat behind. But he couldn't shake the feeling that nowhere was safe. What lay ahead was dark, and would ultimately lead to a showdown that would define everything. And as they plunged deeper into the chaos, the question that lingered was no longer just about Jessica but how far he was willing to go to save her in a world that threatened to swallow them whole. Mark's heart thundered in his chest as Brian navigated through the downpour, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the relentless rain. They were driving too fast, but it felt like the only way to escape their pursuers. The black SUV was still out there, lurking somewhere behind them, like a shadow waiting for the right moment to pounce. Brian, are you sure you know where we're going? Mark asked, the tremor in his voice betraying his facade of bravery. The last thing he needed was another curveball when Jessica's safety hung by a thread. Trust me, Brian replied curtly, his eyes focused on the road. We're nearly there, but we have to lose them first. I have a place, a safe house. Just a little further. Mark's mind raced. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on him like a heavy fog. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. As they sped around a corner, a blinding light illuminated the car's interior. Eyes wide, Mark turned just in time to see the black SUV surging forward. Too close, too menacing. It felt like the hammer of inevitability, thumping closer with each passing moment. Hold on, Brian shouted, slamming on the brakes. They skidded sideways, and the SUV whizzed past them with a deafening roar. For a split second, Mark's world spiraled into chaos, a blur of wet asphalt and darkness. And then silence, that fleeting breath of stillness. Every second felt like an eternity. The storm outside continued its assault, but inside the car, an oppressive silence weighed heavily. Mark glanced at Brian, who was panting heavily, his face pale and tight. They were shaken but alive. Did they miss us? Mark breathed, half hoping, half dreading the answer. Brian nodded slowly, his grip on the wheel still white-knuckled. For now. But they won't be far behind. We need to move now. Just as Brian shifted the gears, the unmistakable sound of screeching tires echoed through the night. It came from behind, a chilling promise that they weren't off the hook yet. Brian tore down a side street, tires hydroplaning over puddles. The world outside morphed into a smear of lights and shadows. Where is this safe house? Mark asked, desperation leaking into his tone. It's an old friend's place, someone who owes me, Brian replied. But even as he spoke, doubt flickered in his eyes. It should be secure. If we can just get there. A deafening crash rang out as the black SUV slammed into a nearby lamppost, sending sparks flying and metal screeching. Instinctively, Brian swerved, narrowly missing the wreckage. "Brian, focus," Mark shouted, heart racing as they careened past the wreckage. "They're not giving up. It's like they know exactly where we are." Brian spat, jaw clenched. Then, through a torrential downpour, Mark caught sight of an alley up ahead. "There," he pointed. "Turn left." With a flick of the wheel, Brian veered, tires squealing. Mark's breath hitched. They entered the alley, shadows swallowing them whole. "Hide the car and keep quiet," Brian instructed, glancing around nervously. "They might pass by looking for us." They parked the car and crept out into the inky darkness, pressing against the damp brick wall. Mark's heart hammered, adrenaline coursing through him. Each creak and rustle sent his senses into overdrive. The storm concealed their escape, but danger was never far. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the alley. Mark's eyes widened, and Brian held his breath. The figures were close now, too close, enveloped by the storm. "They're searching for us," Mark whispered, panic lacing his every word. "Stay low. We need to get to the safe house quickly." Brian pulled Mark deeper into the shadows, but the footsteps continued to close in, relentless like a predator on the trail. In that moment, a piercing thought struck Mark. What if Jessica was already in their grasp? He felt a lump in his throat. He had to hold on to faith. She needed him to fight. Just as the figures entered the alley, Mark realized they had no way out. Pressing against the rough brick, heart racing, he whispered urgently, "What's the plan? We can't let them catch us." Brian's gaze was fierce, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "We fight, no matter what." But as the footsteps drew nearer, Mark knew the question wasn't just about escaping. Was he willing to confront the darkness that had swallowed Jessica whole? Before he could voice it, a chilling voice echoed through the night. "Where are you hiding, Brian?" An icy shiver raced down Mark's spine. In that moment, he understood the real battle was just beginning. Would they have what it took to confront the storm ahead? The footsteps drew closer, each crunch of gravel a reminder that time was slipping away. Mark clutched Brian's arm, his heart pounding violently against his ribcage. The name echoed in his mind, Jessica. He couldn't let her become a memory, not when he still had a fighting chance. "Think, Brian," Mark hissed, leaning back against the brick, scanning for an escape route. "We can't just stand here." "I know," Brian muttered, eyes darting around. Before he could finish, a shadow loomed at the mouth of the alley. The figure was tall, barely distinguishable through the relentless rain, but the unmistakable silhouette of a gun barrel glimmered ominously. Mark's breath caught in his throat as adrenaline surged through him. "Don't move." The voice was sharp and commanding, slicing through the storm. It was a deep voice, authoritative, and carried a weight that made Mark's muscles tense with fear. Without thinking, Mark grabbed Brian's wrist and ducked lower, pushing against the damp bricks until his back ached. The cold splatters from the rain splashed on his face, grounding him in a chilling reality. "Brian, do we run? Fight?" Mark whispered, feeling panic clutch at his throat. Brian shook his head slightly. "There's too many of them. Let us just keep quiet. They might leave." Mark's heartbeat drummed loudly in his ears, drowning out the roiling storm. "If they find us, we're done," he thought, fear clawing at his mind. He could feel tears of frustration sting his eyes. Jessica was out there, and here they were hiding like cowards. Just then, a second figure joined the first, both scanning the shadows. The flicker of a flashlight danced through the alley's darkness, casting eerie shapes against the wet brick wall. Mark's chest tightened. They were just feet away. "Split up," one of the men instructed, voice gruff. "If they're here, we'll flush them out." Panic bubbled up inside Mark. "They're gonna check here," he whispered frantically. But Brian's face was set in grim determination. That SRQ to move. Before Mark could protest, Brian shoved him toward the back of the alley, where a chain-link fence loomed, its razor edges glinting. They crept silently, hearts hammering, ears straining to catch any sound that might tip them off. As they reached the fence, they paused. The flashlight beams backtracked. A moment of decision hung heavy between them. What now? Mark whispered, glancing over his shoulder. Climb, Brian commanded softly, urgency coating his words. Without hesitation, they both scrambled up the fence outside, fingers gripping the rusted metal while rain dripped into their eyes. Every sound around them felt like an alarm bell. As they dropped to the other side, the thunder cracked louder, overshadowing their landing. No more hiding. They needed to get to the street and vanish into the chaos of the storm. Brian led the way into a narrow street, slippery with rain-soaked debris. Mark followed, each step a gamble. Would they make it, or would they be caught and dragged back into the darkness? Up ahead, a small neon sign glimmered through the rain. A diner, 24 hours. An unlikely refuge, but maybe just what they needed. In there, Mark urged, his body fueled by desperation. Brian nodded sharply. They darted down the street, soaking wet and breathless, hearts racing with adrenaline. As they burst through the door, the warm air enveloped them like a blanket. But they had no time to catch their breath, not yet. Get a table, Mark urged. We need to blend in. As they settled into a booth near the back, Mark's eyes scanned the room. Was this safe? The diner was half empty, but the presence of two men by the counter caught his eye. They weren't just waiting. They were watching. Brian, Mark whispered, voice trembling, I think they know we're here. Brian shifted, intent on surveying the threat. We have to stay calm. If they're looking for us, they'll have to search elsewhere. But just then, one of the men stood up, pushing the door open and stepping outside. Mark felt a cold knot twist in his stomach. What if he was calling for backup? Keep your eyes open, Brian muttered, his gaze darting. As the remaining man turned to face them, Mark froze, a terrifying realization dawning on him. This was no random encounter. They had arranged this. Brian, he breathed, dread pooling in his gut. What if they know about Jessica? Before they could think of an exit strategy, the diner door swung open again, and a silhouette appeared, a familiar, unmistakable figure. Mark. Jessica's voice rang clear. But how? Why was she here? In a heartbeat, Mark's heart shifted from dread to hope, only to be consumed by the fear that right behind her, the shadows crept ever closer. Run! Mark shouted, but doubt clawed at his throat. Would he truly be able to save her this time? Their fates were intertwined. But now the storm was just beginning to brew. The diner buzzed with tension, the atmosphere thick and electric. Mark's heart raced as the door swung shut behind Jessica, her damp hair clinging to her face, breathless and wild-eyed. It struck him. How in that moment? She seemed both a beacon of hope and a heavy reminder of the danger lurking right outside. Mark, Jessica began, panic shimmering in her voice, but she didn't finish. Instead, her gaze zoomed in on the man at the counter. The way he shifted, his eyes narrowing just slightly, sent chills racing down Mark's spine. It was clear. He knew they were being hunted. Get back! Mark yelled, instinct kicking in. He lunged forward, nearly knocking over his seat. He needed to shield her, to find a way out. We have to move. No sooner had he spoken than the diner's front door creaked open again, and another figure stepped inside. The rain-soaked shadows wrapped tighter around the newcomer, enveloping the room in a dread that stretched thin like the fraying cord of a disconnected phone. Stay by the back! Brian barked at Jessica and Mark. The warning was clear, and they instinctively scooted closer to the booth, blending into the shadows. Where's the exit? Jessica breathed, her eyes wide, reflecting fear and hope all at once. Mark scanned the diner, desperation clawing at his chest. The only way out was through the front, but every second counted. He could feel the tension in the air, like a coiled spring ready to snap. We can't just sit here, he muttered, hating their vulnerability. The man who had entered was now moving toward their side of the diner, his face stern and unyielding, making quick work of the space between them. Mark clenched his fists, ready to fight if necessary. But then, the man smiled. It wasn't warm, it was predatory. Hey, buddy, he called, making no secret of his intention. "Why don't you come over here? We need to have a talk." Mark's stomach dropped. He squeezed Jessica's hand, feeling her tremble beside him. "Don't move," he whispered, even as the room began to feel small and the air thickened with impending doom. "Stay quiet," Brian added, keeping his eyes on the approaching threat. The man stopped short, glancing back at the other seated patrons. The small diner held its breath, witnessing the unraveling drama. Just then, the original figure who had been keeping watch outside slipped back in, and Mark's heart raced again, pounding against his ribcage. "Jake," the second man called out, stepping beside the first. The two exchanged a knowing look. They were playing a game, and Mark was becoming painfully aware they were but pawns caught in a high-stakes chess set. "Look," Jake began, his eyes locking onto Mark. "We just want to talk. This doesn't need to get messy." Messy? The word hung heavy in the air like a storm cloud, echoing the very situation they were in. Mark wanted to scream that they didn't want to talk. They wanted to escape, possibly save Jessica, and survive whatever scheme these men had entangled them in. "Your friend Jessica," Jake continued, his voice dripping with calculated ease, "is a lot more than she seems. You don't know what you're up against." The bombshell sent a jolt through Mark. "What did you say?" he demanded, his pulse quickening. "She's got something we want, and she's put you right in our line of fire." Jessica's expression hardened, determination flaring in her eyes. "I'm not afraid of you," she shot back, her voice steadier than Mark felt inside. Mark stole a glance at Brian, whose face knitted with thought. A plan was forming, but could it work? "Guys, we have to make a choice right now." Brian's eyes swept the room. "Either we fight here or we run while we still can." Mark's mind raced. They couldn't risk a showdown in front of onlookers. It would only escalate, drawing more attention. But before he could respond, the diner's silence erupted like a thunderclap. The door burst open again, seemingly welcoming chaos. A trio of figures burst inside, their faces obscured by rain and shadows. Mark's heart dropped. More people. This was spiraling out of control. Suddenly, the men's expressions shifted. Confusion turned to alarm. Fleeting glances suggested the arrival wasn't a coincidence. "Time us up," Jake grunted, as the new figures bore down on them. "Mark," Jessica screamed as the tension snapped, proving no words could prepare them for the havoc about to ensue. Mark's mind raced to find a way out, a way to keep them both safe, but everything hinged on one critical decision. Do we fight or run? He thought desperately, but as chaos erupted around them and his choice loomed, it was clear every second mattered. In the heart of the storm, what would he sacrifice to save those he loved? The next moments could mean life or death. A cacophony ripped through the diner, drowning out the chatter and clinking cutlery. Mark's instincts kicked in, shoving every ounce of urgency through his veins. He spotted an exit sign dimly flickering at the far end of the diner and locked eyes with Jessica. "Let us go," he shouted, his voice slicing through the chaos. He grabbed her wrist. But even as they surged toward the back, the newcomers were already flanking them. The trio moved with unsettling speed, their intentions pulsating through the air like a live wire. One of them, a woman with dark hair and a piercing gaze, held a gun angled dangerously upward, her demeanor cold and calculating. "Not so fast," she barked, her tone reverberating with authority. Panic clawed at Mark's throat. He swung around, dragging Jessica close to him, shielding her with his body. Brian was still tense, muttering under his breath, attempting to gauge their options. He caught Mark's eye, and they exchanged unspoken words, knowing all too well that time was running out. "Are you insane?" Jessica hissed into his ear, her breath hot against his skin. "If we run, they'll shoot." Mark clenched his jaw, weighing their choices as the tension in the diner peaked like a tightly strung bow ready to snap. He could feel the terrifying grip of fear wrapping around his chest, squeezing. An unsettling laugh broke the silence. Jake stepped closer, swaggering as if he owned the place. "You really think you can just walk out?" he taunted, glancing at his men with a smirk. "You're in way over your heads. I'm not afraid of you, Jessica shouted defiantly, though her voice quivered ever so slightly. Mark admired her courage but felt the pull of dread in his gut. He needed to answer soon or risk losing everything. Yet just as Mark prepared to answer Brian's silent plea for a unified front, the diner erupted into chaos. The front door slammed open again, this time with a purpose. "Cover me," shouted the lead newcomer, a tall figure draped in shadows. The sound of pounding footsteps and the jangle of metal filled the room as the woman with the gun quickly shifted her aim. The atmosphere exploded with noise, high-cap vibrations reverberating through the walls as patrons ducked for cover, screams echoing off the walls. "Get down," Brian yelled, diving towards Jessica and Mark. Just in time, two exchanging gunfire erupted, sending shards of fear straight down Mark's spine. For a moment, everything slowed. Mark felt the rush of the air around him, felt Jessica press closer, fear mingling with adrenaline as sirens wailed in the distance. The smell of rain and sweat combined in the chaos, a reminder of the world outside while hell unfurled inside the diner. "Go, go, go!" Brian's voice broke through the chaos, urging them to move. With a swift pull, he dragged Jessica towards the rear exit, and Mark followed on instinct, his feet pounding against the slick floor, adrenaline firing through him like electricity. But just as they reached the kitchen, Mark glanced back, heart clenching at the sight of Jake, who was yelling orders and gesturing wildly to his comrades. "Stop them," he growled, his voice drowning in fury and desperation. The new figures advanced, but Mark felt the pulse of defiance grow within him. He could still feel Jessica's warmth beside him as Brian shoved the kitchen door open. "Up," he shouted, shoving them through as chaos echoed behind. Mark pushed Jessica as they escaped into the alley, the rain drenching them from above. "Where do we go now?" she gasped, breathless, panic creeping back into her voice. With sirens wailing ever closer, Mark's mind raced. "We need plans," he replied, each word laced with urgency. But in that moment, his heart sank as he thought of the danger still lurking behind them. Behind the diner, they plunged into obscured shadows. Was this just the beginning? As they took their first steps toward safety, Mark realized that the chase was far from over. "Jessica, what do they want from you?" he pressed, urgency knotting in his stomach. "It's not just about me, Mark," she said, her eyes wild and unfocused. "What do you mean?" A smirk crept onto her face, but then she faltered as distant footsteps echoed down the alley. The tension was palpable. They could be caught at any moment. But before she could reply, a sharp shout came from the ground floor of the diner, and Mark instinctively gripped Jessica's shoulder, bracing for whatever was to come next. "Run!" A voice blared from the shadows where they ventured, and the microscopic choice began to fester inside him. Was running really the best option? The echoes of their past reverberated through the night, and all Mark could think was that whatever was going on, it wasn't just about them anymore. As they turned to flee deeper into the darkness, Mark heard a chilling phrase that sent a jolt through his system. "Get her. We can't let her get away." In that instant, he understood this was no longer merely about survival. What lay ahead could change everything. Mark pushed Jessica forward, urgency fueling his steps as they weaved through the narrow alley behind the diner. Rain pounded against the asphalt, blurring the world around them. The sirens wailed louder, but all Mark could hear were the desperate footsteps chasing them, echoing off the damp bricks like a death knell. "Where to now?" Jessica panted, her voice strained under the weight of fear and fatigue. They had barely escaped the chaos inside, and already the world felt intent on swallowing them whole. Up ahead, Mark pointed toward a flickering light spilling from a hidden doorway further down the alley. It could lead to safety or a trap. He felt his gut twist. But with no time to lose, he surged forward. "Wait," Jessica pulled back slightly, her wide eyes scanning the shadows. "We can't just go barging in. There's no choice. They're coming," Mark urged, glancing back as the sounds of pursuit grew nearer. The adrenaline coursed through him, each beat of his heart reminding him they needed to accede as they neared the door. The shadows seemed to twist and breathe. Something primal flickered in Mark's chest, an instinct warning him to stop, to hold on and consider their options. But the moment of hesitation passed, swept away in a flood of panic. They reached the door, and he slammed it open, the smell of stale air hitting them hard. Inside was a dimly lit storage room stacked high with crates. Instinctively, they ducked behind one, the heavy thump of footsteps and muffled shouts vibrating through the walls. Mark pressed close to Jessica, feeling her warmth and fragility against him, a tether to sanity in the madness. "What do they want?" Mark whispered urgently, his breath shaky. The urgency in Jessica's eyes mirrored his own, but it was the fear lurking beneath her bravado that gnawed at him. I don't know everything," she stammered, her gaze darting around as if the walls were listening. "But it's not just about me. It's about the wrong people knowing things. Things that could ruin lives, Mark. What are you talking about? What have you gotten into?" His voice was a harsh whisper, desperation threading through each word. Before she could respond, the door creaked open, and Mark's heart raced as a silhouette emerged, shadows cloaking the figure. Mark gripped Jessica's arm tighter, adrenaline sparking in his veins as they froze like deer caught in headlights. Jake's voice sliced through the stillness like a blade. "I know you're in here. You can't hide forever." The air felt thick and electric, a web of fear binding them where they crouched. Mark could barely hear Jessica's breathing beside him, each gasp a reminder of their fragile existence. He made eye contact with her, and a pact formed between them: survive whatever it took. "Mark," she breathed, eyes wide with understanding as she realized the depth of their predicament. Suddenly, the door burst open wider, revealing a team of grim-faced figures, weapons drawn and ready. They flooded into the room like wolves chasing prey, eyes blazing with intent. "Now," Mark whispered, his mind racing. They had to move. The moment had come to break from the shadows or be lost forever. But just as he was about to pull Jessica to her feet, a loud crash echoed through the room. The crate beside them toppled, sending wood splintering and debris scattering. The figures turned, locked onto their position. "Over there. Get them," Jake sneered, pointing straight toward them, his presence like a dark cloud. Without thinking, Mark shoved Jessica toward the back exit they hadn't noticed earlier. The moment hung suspended in air, each beat of his heart echoing like a warning drum. They were cornered, and dread hung thick like fog around them. "Go," he bellowed, desperation bleeding through his words. He sprang into action, ready to face anything to keep her safe. As she darted toward the exit, Mark turned back for a split second. The men surged against him, and Jake's eyes locked onto his with cold fury. "Get her," he growled, and just like that, the chase surged anew. Mark pushed forward, determination igniting. Within him, their survival depended on taking control. But choices had consequences, and now, they were racing toward a destiny neither had anticipated. Would they make it out, or would this escape shatter everything they held dear? The storm was far from over, and the shadows whispered secrets that would change everything. What lay ahead was darker than they could imagine. The rain lashed against the pavement, each drop a reminder of the urgency that pushed Mark and Jessica deeper into the darkened streets. They moved like shadows, adrenaline thrumming through their veins. Behind them, the sounds of discovery echoed ominously. Footsteps pounding, shouts of frustration. Jake and his dark entourage were relentless. "Why did you have to run?" Mark panted, guilt twisting in his stomach. He wished they'd found a way to talk before the world erupted into chaos. Wished they hadn't ended up in this nightmare. "Because I didn't know who to trust. You have to believe me," Jessica shot back determinedly. Her eyes blazed, fear intermingled with a fierce spark. "I'm not afraid of them, but we need to get out." Mark tightened his grip on her arm, urgency now mingling with the flicker of hope building inside him. "We will. But together. No more running alone," he vowed, desperation pouring through every syllable. They turned a corner, and a dim light flickered ahead. It led toward an old industrial area abandoned, but perhaps a hiding place. Mark's heart raced as they dashed towards the light, the echoes of pursuit growing fainter. "This way," he urged, as they slipped through a chain-link fence, stumbling into the shadows of a dilapidated building. Inside, Dust motes danced in the dim light filtering through cracked windows. The silence enveloped them like a warm embrace, but it didn't last long. They hid behind a wall, chests heaving, breathless from both fear and physical exertion. "What do we do now?" Jessica whispered, glancing around with anxious eyes. "I think they may be close," Mark replied, eyes scanning for clues, for anything that could guide them. "We have to find a way to turn the tables." He could feel her tense beside him. "If we confront them, they could know." He cut her off, feeling a knot tighten in his chest. "We can't let them control us. We need to make a plan." Just then, a noise from outside drew their attention. Faint voices, recognizable. "This way," Jake said. They were headed here. Mark felt bile rise in his throat as the realization hit. How did they know? What had Jessica done to pull them into this game? He had learned bits and pieces, but now it was time for answers. "Jessica, we need to talk," he said, urgency flooding his tone. "What's really going on? What deal did you make that they want so badly?" Her eyes flashed with something between fear and fury. "You need to understand, they want me for knowledge I have about a business venture that went wrong." "I didn't ask for any of this." Mark felt the weight of her words. Some shadowy figure set this all in motion, something far darker than just a simple disappearance. They had unwittingly stumbled into a world of deceit, and now it was closer than ever. Before he could respond, the door of the building creaked open, sending another wave of panic crashing through them. The silhouettes of Jake and his team slipped inside, searching like sharks smelling blood in the water. "Now?" Mark whispered, knowing that the moment had come. "Yes," Jessica replied fiercely, determination blazing in her voice. "If we're going down, we go down fighting." The two of them propelled themselves from their hiding place, and just as Jake stepped further inside, they emerged, catching him off guard. "Mark, Jessica, hold it right there," Mark shouted, adrenaline pushing him forward, fists clenched. Jessica stood beside him, ready to fight back, ready to reclaim their narrative. "Get her," Jake barked, anger sparking in his eyes. But Mark didn't wait to see what they would do. He threw himself at Jake, the sudden impact stunning him momentarily. Jessica wasted no time and dashed for the door, yelling over her shoulder. "Get out. I'll deal with this." "No, I'm not leaving you," Mark shouted, fending off the group stumbling toward him. "Just go," she screamed again as chaos erupted inside the building. They were fighting now, struggling against the wrath of those sent to capture her, and Mark felt the thin line between safety and danger blurring. With a burst of adrenaline, Mark leaned closer to Jessica, pushing his weight against her. Together, they fought away from the encroaching darkness, but time was running out. "We're not out yet," he yelled, pushing them both against a door towards the exit. They burst out into the cool night air, the storm continuing its relentless onslaught as they stumbled into the street, feeling the calm wash over them momentarily, a breath fresh after a bout of suffocation. "Where now?" Jessica gasped, adrenaline still coursing through her. Mark glanced down the road, a narrow alley leading beyond the wild chaos, a fleeting sense of hope sinking in. "We keep moving. There's a chance to lose them in those side streets." They took off together, hearts racing with the victory of running toward a future they still couldn't foresee. But the night was dense with mystery and danger, every moment feeling like a wit of fate that dictated their journey ahead. Behind them, shrieks of frustration echoed as Jake and his crew reeled back into the shadows, waiting, plotting their next moves. But as Mark and Jessica disappeared into the storm, they forged a bond stronger than fear, two souls intertwined, ready to fight the unknown that awaited. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their futures, no matter what came next. Mark's eyes found Jessica's. They both knew the road ahead would be riddled with challenges, but with every footfall, they grew closer to reclaiming their lives. Little did they know, the storm that pursued them was only a prelude to the final confrontation, one that would force them to decide what they were truly willing to sacrifice. And while the rain poured down, somewhere in the darkness, shadows conspired, ready to strike in a world that was demanding answers. Now, as we close this gripping chapter, don't you dare miss out on the next explosive installment. You need to subscribe right this second to ensure you're among the first to catch the next thrilling story that unfolds. Smash that like button now to show your support and help the algorithm keep this adventure alive. Flood the comments section with your reactions to this mind-blowing conclusion, and let us know your theories about where the story will take these fighters next. And for the love of all that's good, share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this epic finale. Don't wait even one more second to be a true fan and keep this community buzzing.